begin by apologizing for provide feedback for the calendar. And I do believe that we will be able to get done today all those things that were scheduled for last week as well as this week. We do have our chairperson for the calendar committee with us today on the Zoom call. And so, Mr. Boyer, if you would like to share a few words, that would be great to open the meeting with. And it may be that his microphone is not connected just yet, so we'll just pause that and give him an opportunity to speak as the meeting gets started. All right, I see quite a few folks are still logging in. So what I'll do is just go over just really our purpose for today and ultimately our outcome for this work. So the purpose today will actually be to review all of the calendars that we have. A decision was made by the Sunset Park staff that I was notified of earlier today that they will actually be following the traditional calendar. So we will not have a separate calendar for Sunset Park Elementary School. The only calendar we will not be able to review today is Lake Forest Academy, but we're very close with that one. And so when we send out the finalized drafts, we'll make sure that we share that with everyone as well. But for the most part, of course, the calendar at Lake Forest impacts only that staff, those students, and their families. But we want to make sure that we are in compliance with all calendar requirements. And so we'll make sure that all of our calendars before being presented to the board have been reviewed and are in compliance with all aspects of calendar law as well. So before I begin, just wanted to check and see if there are any questions or any comments before we start. Well, if not, then the ultimate purpose, and we hope the ultimate outcome, will be to be able to bring these calendars to the board for review and approval on June 16th, which will be the interim board meeting. And I think with the progress that we've made as a committee, there really should not be a reason why we're not at a point to bring these calendars as final drafts to the board for their approval on the 16th. So the first calendar that I'd like for us to take a look at would be the traditional school calendar. Just to review, 173 student days, 16 teacher work days, 11 holidays, 10 vacation days, and 5 remote learning days. And just as a reminder, those remote learning days are required by the state. We do have some feedback that I want to share with you in regards to the calendar. There was a question that we had asked of the committee about 2 meetings ago in regards to adding some additional time to the calendar. If we added that additional time, then if we found ourselves missing school as the result of inclement weather, then there would be strong likelihood that we would not have to make up those days. We would not have to make up that time because we would, in essence, have a cushion. And so the conversation and the discussion, just as a reminder, was about adding 5 minutes to the beginning of the day and 5 minutes to the end of the day, which would give us about a 28-hour cushion and so essentially, if our school days are 6 hours in length, that would give us a little over 4 days in which we would not have to make up those days if we missed that time. Adding only 5 minutes to the beginning or the end of the day would provide us with 14 hours, excuse me. So that would give us a little bit over 2 days. And so a principal survey was sent out, and I want to thank Deanna Leak and the folks who responded to the survey. And 72.2% of principals indicated that they had a preference for adding 5 minutes to the beginning, 5 minutes to the end. There was also another question in terms of there are already schools that extend their time. So the traditional elementary school day for the most part is from 8 to 2:30, but there are some schools already going from 7:45 to 2:30. So those schools would not extend. If a school was already starting from 7:45 to maybe 2:15, then that school would have the flexibility of adding that time either on the beginning or the end of their day. Just understanding maybe what would work best for their parents, and also taking into consideration what transportation would be able to accommodate. So I'd love to provide the opportunity for some discussion at this point. So thoughts about the results of the survey and adding 5 to 10 minutes to the beginning of the school day.
Dr. Smith, can I ask a question about the 173 days? How many hours is that?
So and actually I had that on another slide, so let me do that very quickly.
Sorry, that's fine. I can wait till you get there.
You are fine. So that would be 1,038 hours.
Dr. Smith, I just wanted to add that some of our middle schools also may have additional time, and they may start earlier than some of the secondary schools. Like we may have a middle school that starts at 8:20 versus 8:30, that sort of thing. So they may have extra time built into. I just wanted to add that on as a piece.
Yes, and what we're talking about with elementary schools would be consistent with middle schools. We're basing it on a 6-hour day. So if they're already extending their day beyond that, then they would not need to make any additional adjustments unless there was some reason those adjustments were driven for a different reason. Example of that is Holly Shelter. I know we've made some changes in their schedule as a result of transportation needs. And so that operates outside of this. This is just to be in compliance with the requirements of state law regarding calendars.
Thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome. So questions, discussions? And so I think it's Charlie who asked the question about maybe being able to add 10 minutes to the end of the day as opposed to 5 before and 5 after. Charlie, what I would say to you here is the biggest driver in that would be transportation. We don't want to create a bigger concern than the concern that we're trying to resolve. So, and Eddie, if you're on the call, you surely can speak to this, but I would offer that if transportation can accommodate and it doesn't negatively impact routes, then I'm sure that would not be a problem.
Yeah, that was one of the pieces of feedback I got from middle schools was that sometimes in the morning between elementary and middle, transportation could sometimes be a little bit more of an issue with buses. So if that, instead of having 5 minutes in the morning, if we sort of kept our original start time but moved later, it might ease things up in the morning time.
So in essence, you're looking to make transportation's job a little easier by accommodating a greater window between the two.
Right. That's
okay.
That was our thought. And then certainly some of our, I don't know if it would help, but some of our high school buses, share not as much as they used to. But anyway, might help in the afternoon if an elementary route, is a little late, instead of needing to be at a school certainly by 3:30. If they had to be there, had a little bit more cushion, it might help them, to be a little later.
Okay. And I appreciate you guys problem solving on that. And I think ultimately I think what the point is we don't want to inconvenience families any more than necessary. So we don't want to inconvenience them with huge shifts in time, nor do we want to inconvenience them when we have to change the calendar and make up time. So if we can be proactive, then that is the preferred way to operate. So any additional discussion?
Dr. Smith, just to speak from the elementary perspective, I do believe that we would be in favor of the additional time and the cushion. And another reason being all of the planning that we have and you have put into building a calendar that is as effective as possible, and all the professional development that is going to be planned throughout the year. So to have that cushion and potentially set us up to be, as least disruptive as possible if something else does occur, so that we don't disrupt all those other schedules.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that feedback. So just, offering a summary statement, what I believe that I'm hearing is that as a calendar committee, we're comfortable with adding the 10 additional minutes to the school day, whether that's 5 in the front, 5 in the back, or 10 on the back end. That's what I hear us saying. Okay, silence. Yes.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that the pros far weigh out the cons with that choice.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. The next set set of feedback that we received in regards to the traditional calendar was about having the 5 remote days together and specific to elementary students. And and here the comment is, due to the age of students, we think 5 days in a row will be very challenging. We would rather see these 5 days spread throughout the year, with opportunities to teach and preview just before the remote learning days, and opportunities to remediate throughout the year if they struggle to use these to use applications. The challenge to our families to request 3 weeks in a row off from their employees is also a concern. And so I really appreciate this. And I think here it is a challenge, because a lot of the decision that placed these days where they are in the calendar was driven more so on the secondary side. And so as you remember, we discussed that the semester ends before we go home for winter break. The second semester actually technically starts with the remote learning days, but those days can be used in 2 ways. They definitely can be used to support our high school students in terms of providing them the opportunity for extended learning. And so if we have a student who has not performed well for first semester, then we could look at grade replacement or some sort of credit recovery, grade recovery or some sort of credit recovery within those first 5 days. So those students don't lose that credit. And I'm sure our secondary folks and Mr. O'Brien can surely speak much more eloquently about the impact of our students coming through first semester and not earning the needed and the necessary credits. The other piece to this, and this works for elementary, middle, and also secondary, is that, and also students who may again need those extended learning opportunities, is that this provides the opportunity for pre-teaching or previewing the learning for second semester. It also provides a great opportunity for professional development for teachers, as we prepare to open that second semester. And so it could be the emphasis in the training dates are on the first half of the year at the beginning of the calendar. And then you've got a secondary emphasis on training dates on the second half of the year, as opposed to trying to have teachers go through all the professional development for the most part that they might need during the entire year. So, but there are definitely pros and cons. This is not a 100% solution for either. So given that information, context, we'd love to have some discussion about the placement of the remote learning days.
Dr. Smith, before we move to that, can I just ask another question? And I apologize if I'm missing something. The 5 remote learning days are part of the 173 days, correct?
They are not.
Okay, so the calendar law requires the 5 remote learning days to be part of the 1,025 hours or 185 days. Then there are 5 additional full in-person instructional days that are standalone that cannot be remote. So I think that I think that your math is still going to work, but those 5 remote learning days are part of the 173, and then you have 5 additional standalone instructional days. So the labeling would just change if my math is correct. And those 5.
Let's see. Well, let me. Yeah, you're exactly right. Let me make sure I'm telling you correctly. Yeah. So actually there are 178 student days. And I guess the reason we listed it this way, so that there was some distinction for folks
Sure.
to understand the difference between the two. So
Sure.
actually we do have some additional hours built into that. So I do apologize for that.
So just so I'm clear, the first bullet should say 178 student days.
So yes, so 178 total student days, with 173 of those being face-to-face, and then 5 of them being remote learning.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is the total number of hours then?
Well, and I think part of the challenge was that, if I'm not mistaken, there was not a lot of great clarity around the length of the remote learning day.
That's correct.
Yeah, so even though a student would not be present in school, but they're receiving instruction. So I think the reason we did not count those in the hours was just simply because we were unsure of how many hours we could attribute to the remote learning days.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that would be a 3-hour day, a 2-hour day, a 1-hour day, a 4-hour day.
Well, I think that for purposes of ensuring that there's compliance with the calendar law,
Mhm.
you will need to identify the 5 additional instructional days, wherever they are, identify them. And they have to be, the law says you can't have remote days during the first 5 days of instruction. So you could, I think, logically say the first 5 days of instruction face-to-face are the 5 additional instructional days. And then after that, you sort of take those out of the equation, and then you still have to have 1,025 hours or 185 days. And so whatever is left when you take out those 5 full instructional days, you still have to have the minimum for the 1,025.
Okay.
Does that?
It does. So do you have an idea of how many hours we would attribute a remote learning day to?
I think a remote learning day has to, I think it doesn't have to be, 6 full hours of the student being online, but I do think there has to be enough instruction packed into the remote learning day that it could, you can justify that it will take a student approximately a day of school to complete that work, whether it's working offline on projects, et cetera. I think if you have a 1 hour remote learning day, that's probably too little. I don't think it needs to be 6.5. So, you know, there's going to, obviously some students will finish the work more quickly than others. But I would say, you know, a judgment about how much instruction needs to take place in one school day would be the rule of thumb for a remote day.
Okay, okay. So then let me go back. So then if we, and of course, this is definitely discussion for the calendar committee as a whole. And Ms. Stagner, I really appreciate your guidance. You know, if I thought calendars were confusing before, woohoo.
Yeah.
So in my mind, my recommendation would be that, just as you said, the first 5 days, looking here at beginning on August 17th, we could identify those as the 5 additional days. So that would be our 5 additional days. So then that would give us 168 student days beyond the 5 days plus the 5 remote learning days. So that still adds up to the 173. We would count the 168 student days just under what we've always done as having 6 instructional hours as a part of them. And this is before we're adding that additional time. And then the remote learning days, my suggestion, and again, calendar committee, please chime in, is that they be counted as 3 hours. So that would give us an additional 15. And then if we're doing the math and adding 10 minutes to the day, that would be 10 minutes to 168 days. Which in my mind is 28 hours, but I would trust someone else's judgment more so than mine.
Dr. Smith, let me ask a question, please.
Yes.
I want to be sure I've got this in my head as well. And yes, this is very confusing. And Ms. Stagner, if you could help with this. So the baseline, the number of days related to the 1,025 hours, if we're going to have a total of 178 days, including the 5 remote days and the 5 additional days, where do we start with the 1,025 hours? And I may not be asking the question correctly. So
no, I think you are, Dr. Burns. What I would say is that it is probably more helpful to think about the 1,025 hours separate from the 5 additional days, because however many days it takes to come up with the 1,025 hours, then you still have to add 5 full instructional days on top of that to reach the 190.
yes, and by my math, if we have a 6-hour day and divide that into 1,025, it's 170.8. So we'd have 171 days that reaches the 1,025 plus a little bit. Then we add 5 more days, and now we're at 176. And then the 5 remote days on top of that comes up to 181.
I think that the 5 remote days are part of the 1,025 hours.
Okay, but if they're not 6 hours, then you're going to have to increase that number from 171 if they're only 3 hours.
Correct.
Ms. Stagner, without guidance from the state, what would be the reason to make those 3 hours? I mean, it seems to me that the remote learning days could easily count for 6 hours. I mean, the days that kids are in school, they're having lunch,
Right.
they're going to the bathroom, they're recess, itinerants. So if you say, well, you know, those things would be happening at home as well, I don't know why we couldn't count those as 6 hours of instructional time.
Right. I think that's exactly right. And maybe, I think maybe we may be talking past each other a little bit about the remote learning days. I think that a remote learning day, again, should be a day that the student will spend the full 6 hours. For an average student, will be spending the full 6 hours on instruction, whether it's all face-to-face with a screen during that time, or whether they're spending some independent time working on writing a story, reading a book, doing an art project, whatever it might be. That's time that child is spending in instruction. And so the 3 hours, if you're talking about 3 hours, that might be the 3 hours of the planned lesson the teacher has that she or he is, you know, spending, has pre-recorded or is spending on the screen with the students. So I do agree. I think you can count the remote instructional days as a full instructional day, but I would caution that the lesson plans, the instructional plans for those days needs to reasonably come up to 6 hours if you're going to count it for 6 hours. But it doesn't all necessarily have to be 6 hours of the student sitting in front of a screen.
Thank you very much.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mary Hazel.
If I may, if we don't do that, then the adding the 10 minutes doesn't solve your issue of being able to use as makeup days. You know, because you'd end up using the extra 10 minutes to just get to your minimum. So it is, if you really wanted those to be able to be makeup days, the remote need to be the full 6 hours.
We'll just need to communicate that to our teachers and in our families, which will be different than where we are right now. But we can definitely do that, because again, we don't want to extend the traditional school day so much that it becomes just this unreasonable burden to families and to our staff. It's almost as if, you know, by adding the 5 days, they give you these days, but then they don't allow you to count them. Okay, so questions about that? I know it's, you know, clear as mud, but. So what we'll do is in essence, there are 178 student days. The first 5 days, we will make probably a notation at the bottom of the calendar, just so that we know that those are the additional days that have been legislated. And for our remote learning days, what we'll communicate to our staff and our families is that the expectation is that these are full school days. So just like we would have 6 hours in terms of an instructional day, these would be 6 hour instructional days. And that, of course, will look very different at home than it would at school.
Dr. Smith, this is Bernice Johnson with New Hanover County Council of PTAs. And so, speaking as a parent, just like thinking about 6 days of instruction, 6 hours of instruction, to me, would be a little tough to me. But
well,
that's just, you know, I'm thinking about parents, you know, working parents and things of that nature.
Well, and I think what we're going to have to do is to really support parents in understanding that. And, you know, I've got a 10-year-old at home who's been in remote learning, and I cannot imagine him tethered to his computer or his desk for 6 continuous hours in terms of doing schoolwork. But I think Mr. Bowyer makes the point, it will look very different at home. So at home, it might be, the fact that they spend time, going outside, the fact that they spend time, even organizing and straightening their room. So there's so many things that we teach as a part of our curriculum. We've got the written curriculum, we've got the unwritten curriculum in terms of social skills. It may be that a parent is at work and they leave a task for a child to complete in terms of, them following and being responsible. That connects directly with our character education. So I think we're going to have to support our families in understanding that it will need to look different. It does not mean that a child is engaged in online work, book work, written work for the total 6 hours that has been indicated as a full instructional day. And nor will it be, 6 hours of synchronous instruction on the part of our teachers. It may be that there's a asynchronous video that they watch during the course of the day. It may be that there's a synchronous activity that they do with their teacher. But we can handle that on the instructional side. But I agree with you as a parent, just hearing that and parent having to be responsible for that would be a lot. So we're going to have to definitely support our parents in that. And we're actually planning, as a part of our remote learning plan, parent professional development, so that we can support parents in understanding their role. And it's not to necessarily take the place of the teacher, although we know we've got some parents who definitely are very good at what they do and probably could really step up into that role. But we also know that we've got some parents who would be uncomfortable in doing that. So we are planning some professional development and support for for parents to help them in understanding that role.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am, and thank you for your comment. I appreciate it. Other discussion, and thank you, Ms. Stagner, for your help in understanding this.
Dr. Smith, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
That was asked of me, and I was fairly certain that I knew the correct answer, but I do want to clarify to make sure I'm communicating the correct message. In regards to those remote learning days in the beginning of January, those days would be set regardless of any potential remote learning days that we may or may not have in the fall. Is that correct?
Okay, so when you say potential days that we may or may not have in the fall, I don't understand that part of it.
So what was asked of me is, if for some reason we were to need to go into some form of remote learning in the fall as a result of the pandemic, would those remote learning days in January then be turned into face-to-face days? I am under the, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. And so what I would say is the board always has the flexibility to make changes in the calendar. And so if we found ourselves out of school and we needed to make a change in our calendar, then I don't think that anything in current calendar law would usurp the board's ability to do that. Now, there is also something, or a part of the legislation, I won't say something, but a part of the legislation that speaks to if we're out of school for a number of days. I do believe that's 10. I don't have it in front of me right now. That we can add an additional 5 remote learning days to the calendar. So there is part of the legislation that takes into account the possibility that we would find ourselves dealing with, and it's not specific to the pandemic. It could be connected to a hurricane, although hopefully we don't see what we've seen in the past, that we would be able to add additional remote learning days to our calendar.
Dr. Smith, that's correct. It's if there are 5, if there's a state of emergency of school closure for more than 5 days, then if you have a remote instructional plan that allows additional remote learning days, then those can satisfy the requirements.
Yeah.
Okay, so if this calendar's passed, we would count on those remote learning days as scheduled as we would any other calendar, with the understanding that, as with any other year, the calendar might change. Is that the best way to answer that question?
It is, but we're also very hopeful that by extending our day, that if we do find ourselves out of school because of, we've been out of school because of ice before, because of snow, that we would not have to make up those days just simply because we have exceeded the number of hours to meet the state's requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. All right. So any other questions or discussion? Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry. This is just a larger version of the calendar, although I was actually trying to go backwards. Let's see. There we go. See if we can. There we go. So going back to, I think the question at hand, or the question before, was about having those 5 days in a row, and the burden that it places on elementary school, as opposed to the benefit that it provides for secondary. So opening that up for discussion.
Yeah, I think that is a trade-off. There are a lot of negatives, a lot of positives. I think that is one that is worth making in this case. I understand that it is a burden, but what we get from that calendar, and again, this is something that the community wanted us to do last year, or some variation of this. I definitely think it's worth it. I think there's an appetite from the board for it. I would like to see it stay, even though it is a trade-off.
Well, and I'll add this, and I know we're going to talk about year-round in just a few minutes. In the, I think it was 570 responses that we received from year-round, they had various calendars that they looked at that had the remote learning days kind of parsed out throughout the calendar, and overwhelming, the feedback was to put all those days together. Now, of course, that's a calendar where they traditionally have longer breaks, things of that nature. But hearing from quite a few elementary parents that they wanted to see those days together. So the two drafts that we're going to look at today represent those days aligning with what is in front of you right now. Any additional discussion? What the other things, or the other point that I would just bring your attention to, is the position of spring break. Again, it's different than what it has been in the past. Well, and I'm just all over the page and clicking. And then again, making the notation that school would end on May 27th. So any recommended changes to the traditional calendar as it's presented to you today?
I hate to ask about graduation dates with what's going on a little, but would high school graduations be like the 28th and 29th of May next year, perhaps?
So what we have historically done is have them on that Saturday. So it would actually be the Memorial Day weekend, that 29th, in terms of what we have historically done.
And I think we discussed that before, and that was kind of something that we thought was the best for our students. I just didn't know if we discussed that, with this calendar committee.
Yeah. No, I don't think we talked specifically about that with this calendar committee, no.
Dr. Smith, last year, I know we had a brief discussion about perhaps dividing graduations having 2 on that Friday evening and then 2 on that Saturday morning / afternoon. I would like to explore something like that. I think that would, I think there'd be a benefit, give each school its own, or 2 schools their own day, cut down on some of the congestion and traffic. It's a very hectic day. It's a very long day for participants. So I think that might be something to explore.
Well, and what I'll say is I think the calendar serves as a marker in a way to communicate that to families. But we can surely engage in that conversation. I think it's a larger one than just simply being had with the calendar committee. But I can surely bring that to our high school principals, and we can put together some folks to work on that and find out what our families and our students would like to see for the 2021 graduation. Okay. And I'll just ask Ms. Cherry Smith if she'll make a note of that for me.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. So the next following, and again, wanting to make sure we don't have any changes to the calendar. But if not, then what I'd like to present to you essentially is the pre-K calendar, which would follow the traditional calendar. And so here we've got the alignment of the remote learning days, also of spring break. They do have some additional days in terms of home visit days. Our pre-K students don't attend on days when they're half days for traditional calendar students, and their requirements are slightly different because of how they're funded in terms of hours. Any questions or discussion about the pre-K calendars? And they were developed by our pre-K office. All right, if not, then we'll take a look at Restart. And again, this calendar was developed by both Freeman Elementary School and Snipes Elementary School because they are our Restart schools. And they also include the 5 remote learning days. And here you see those that are placed strategically within the calendar based on the feedback received from those schools. And they also identify specifically in their calendars professional development days instead of just simply teacher work days. But they function in very similar ways. And I don't know if we've got any of our folks from our Restart schools on the call. If they have any questions or comments.
Hey, Dr. Smith, this is Rachel Manning. I'm here.
Hey.
We shared this with our parents, and feedback we received was very positive. They only had questions that we were able to answer, and it was about the remote learning days and the purpose of them being in the middle of the week. And once we explained to parents, it was designed that way specifically so that we could work with our students the 2 days prior to set up the expectations, what the accountability piece would be. And then the student will be home doing the remote learning and then come back, the next 2 days. After that was explained to the parents that had questions about it, they were all fine with the days being spread out the way they were. So that was the only questions we had about the calendar, and all the feedback we received was positive.
And excuse me. And I noticed that your spring break was in a different location on a previous version, but you wanted to have it aligned with the traditional school calendar, correct?
Yes, that is correct, because that'll better help our families and our employees that work here at our school. Yes.
So any questions or concerns from the group in regards to Restart? All right, our next calendar is Freeman Pre-K. And the Freeman Pre-K calendar follows the Restart calendar. Freeman is our only Restart school that also offers pre-K services. And so the kind of the rules that apply to our pre-K calendar in terms of the number of home visit days is also applicable. What's different here is these students do attend on half days because they're in a traditional elementary school, so they're not at a pre-K center. And so they do come on the half days. So any questions or discussion in regards to pre-K? And I don't know if we've got any of our pre-K folks on the call. And I should have asked that with the other calendar. I know Ms. Smiles was not able to be there, but I don't know if we have anyone else. All right, and if no discussion. The next, what I'd like for us to do is to spend some time talking about year round and understanding that these are modified calendars. So both Eaton and Coddington operate on a modified calendar. And so there were 3 drafts that were sent out as a part of a survey. And we asked families if they would provide us feedback, not to vote on the calendars, but to provide us feedback. And essentially the questions that were asked were, what features of each of these calendars really work for you and your family? And what features of each of these calendars you really cannot live with? And so this is the year-round calendar A. And this calendar starts the school year on July 15th. And for the most part, it is the original year-round calendar, except for the fact that we've added the 5 additional days and we've identified the remote learning days. And then there's year-round draft calendar B. This calendar starts a little bit later on August 4th. Your intersessions are slightly shorter. Excuse me. And you're ending, I believe, just a little bit later, or maybe around the same time as the first calendar. And so both these calendars, along with another version that actually started the school year, I want to say on August the 12th, were given to families. And the reason I shared these 2 drafts with you was because they were definitely most popular. And so what I'd like to do is just very briefly show you what the feedback looked like. We did have, if it comes up, 570 responses to the calendar. Families were given the opportunity to look at draft A, draft B, and then draft C. And then the question posed was, please share features of each calendar, A, B, and C, that you would like to include in a final draft that would be recommended to the board. Please also share aspects of each calendar that would not work for you and your family. And so, of course, we will not go through all the feedback today, but to give you some idea of what it does look like, some folks just simply voted for a calendar, while other folks talked about what they preferred about calendar B, didn't prefer about calendar A, what they preferred about calendar C, that type of thing. There was a strong number of folks who really wanted to start in July, and their desire to start in July was so that they could maintain, for the most part, that traditional calendar that they had been previously experiencing with their family. But there also was a strong contingent of folks who wanted to start a little bit later. People tend to prefer, either A and B or B and C. It wasn't, if you liked A, you really did dislike calendar C. Folks wanted to maintain their traditional breaks as much as possible, but there was some concern about the early start in July. There were folks who expressed that that they would want to start a little bit later, just simply because of COVID-19, and just understanding or their belief that things were going to get a little bit worse before they got better. There was not a clear majority. Again, I think people did have a strong preference for starting in July, but not so strong that they would be upset with the August 4th start.
Dr. Smith, can I ask, your year-round schools, are those 4 tracks or are they single tracks?
They're single tracks.
For the a single track is going to have 45 instructional days and 15 under the definition of the, in the new legislation where it defines for the first time a year-round school. There's 3 different options for a year-round school, and one is dividing students into 4 groups with staggered quarters, so those are the track system, or a plan where their students scheduled to attend 45 instructional days followed by 15 days of vacation, repeated throughout the year, and then a plan in the calendar into 5 9-week sessions where the students attend 4 out of 5. So again, that's a multi-track system. So the definition for a single track year-round school is really very prescriptive for the first time ever.
So these operate as modified under the modified calendar.
Okay, so these are modified?
Yes.
Okay. And they were modified in place so that they're grandfathered in?
So yes, these schools have been
okay.
in operation since before 1998. Okay.
All right, thank you. Sorry to.
No, you're fine. And again, I think a lot of times we use the language that folks are most comfortable with. So we understand that they're not true year-rounds. We understand that they operate under a modified calendar. But when you say year-round, people understand that. So I think we tend to use that just in a more familiar way. But they do operate under a modified calendar, and they're very clear on the fact that if they ever move away from it, that they'll not be able to return to it.
Thank you for the clarification, Dr. Smith.
Yes. So I just wanted to scroll through a little bit of this data. Here's the comment: calendars A and B work for a family schedule. The end of June is very late to finish the school year in calendar C. So really, folks landed, A and B work for us. We have a preference for A or we have a preference for B, but both these calendars work for us. And so the task that's in front of us today is really to make that final decision. We want the information that parents have shared with us to inform that decision, of course, but as the calendar committee, we make that recommendation to the board. So what I'd like to do is just to give folks the opportunity for their thoughts and their input, and then for us to go back to those 2 drafts and talk about what changes we would like to see.
Dr. Smith, as a board member, I would just not vote for calendar A. I think calendar B is the responsible choice. I think it definitely, continues positive aspects that we want from calendar A. But there's so much uncertainty. There's so many new protocols that are going to have to be put into place. I feel like the administration, I feel like we all need that time that calendar B affords us, that almost 3 weeks. It's an important 3 weeks. And I would really urge the committee to put that forward as the recommendation.
And also one additional thing, that there was some discussion about if there was a certain calendar chosen, teachers would not get paid. That's not an issue. That is not on the table in terms of teachers not getting paid in the month of July. And then also, Mr. Boyer, what I would say is, at this point, it's not really between calendar A and calendar B. I would like to see us, for the most part, create a new calendar, starting either with A and making some changes, or with B and making some changes. And it might be that, we think that everything we need to see is in calendar B, but looking at the aspects of both and seeing where the opportunities are. But I do appreciate your comments.
Would that mean going back to those families and sharing with them the changes, or do you think the changes you make to B would be slight enough where we could move forward?
So the changes would be informed by the data that we've got, and anyone interested in reading all 570 comments, as I did, was more than welcome. But again, what I saw was slight preference for A, but not an intolerance of B. And then also, we have been tasked to take what is in front of us and to use that to really drive this process. So what we would do is we would make publicly available the draft that we present, and that would be the draft that we bring to the board. So it wouldn't be going back to folks again, because I think we've got the feedback to make the decision. We've heard from at least 570 families, and I am so very appreciative of them and how thoughtful they were in their comments. But I'd love to hear from other folks in terms of their thoughts and ideas as well.
Dr. Smith, I put some comments in the chat box, but I totally agree. I think A has us starting too soon. And I just personally feel right now that there's a lot of things that are up in the air with the health and safety and what that's going to look like when we start. And I feel like we don't have the answers to that yet, to be totally honest with you. So I definitely am in favor of B. I think it's a great compromise. I appreciate the work and effort that you did for us and for our staff and our parents on this calendar. Thank you.
Oh, you are most welcome. And so this is calendar B, and I'll go between the two as much as you need me to. And so there are a lot of similarities between A and B. I think the biggest difference is the start date. So additional discussion about that. And I see a comment from Charlie that says the earlier start date may have some attendance concerns for staff and for students. And I think that's real for all of our calendars, but quite possibly the earlier start date may lead to more attendance issues or concerns.
Along those lines, and we can talk about it at another point, because I know this is year-round part, but do we know if ADM is going to have any or remote learning or remote interaction would have any impact on ADM if we get to that, in let's say June or July or August? if a student or parent says my child's, I just don't feel comfortable coming to school, I'll participate somehow remotely, would they still be able to be counted as, being part of our school?
So, Mary Hazel definitely chime in this as well. What I would say to you is, long as the student is enrolled with New Hanover County Schools, then they are in membership with us. We currently have students who are part of our virtual academy, our e-learning academy, that are counted in our ADM. I just don't know what it would look like if there was, a large kind of mass exodus near the end of the year. Would we as a district be prepared and positioned to accommodate that? I really don't know, but I think that as long as the family and the child are enrolled, then they continue to count in our ADM. If a family were to unenroll their child, then I think that would be different.
I would just add they need to be enrolled and participating in some way. But we don't know yet how the state will change the formulas that affect our funding based on, acknowledgement statewide that people are going to be hesitant to send their children back at the beginning. So I think we can't answer that yet.
It very well said. I think this is an issue not unique to New Hanover County Schools, and one that state definitely is going to have to address. Okay, so taking into consideration the feedback, and I understand that you only got to glance just a few of the responses, but I'm very willing to answer any questions that you may have about it. But again, I think the general theme was we want to maintain our intersessions. We do like starting early, but we're comfortable enough starting in August, the beginning of August. We were very uncomfortable starting on August 12th. And we don't want to end the school year in late June. I think those were the overarching pieces in terms of the themes that really came out of the survey. But folks were very clear, unequivocally clear, that they wanted to maintain the year-round calendar as much as possible. So looking at the year-round draft B, are there things that you would make in terms of recommended changes when thinking about calendar A, or even thinking about the traditional calendar? Now, one thing I'll point out to our year-round folks, if they haven't noticed, is that your the length of your intersessions, of course, are shorter, but where your spring break falls is different than where the traditional spring break falls.
I did notice that, Dr. Smith, and I mean, unfortunately, I feel like it kind of is what it is at this point. I mean,
we can make that if you wanted to move the days that are identified for the 22nd, 23rd, 24th, and 25th down to April 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th, that we surely could do that with the calendar. That's not a problem.
Okay, then that would be my vote to change it if possible. Right now, our 9 weeks aren't 9 weeks anyway. We have longer, some of them are 12. So we're used to that, to be honest with you, because that's what we ran into this year, so that they did coincide with the traditional schedule. So we're used to having our third 9 weeks really to be longer, to be honest with you, well, in general, and our families are used to that as well.
Well, and what I will say, just like with the restarting calendar, it doesn't have to end at spring break. It can end before. So you could start your fourth 9 weeks before spring break and just run it through spring break. And we can, make the changes here in the central part of the calendar to reflect that. But what I hear you saying is that you'd like to move the 22nd, 23rd, 24th, and 25th to the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th to line up with the traditional calendar.
If that's doable, I think that would be a very popular move.
Okay. Oh, it is very doable.
Okay.
Cherry magic.
Okay, Sherry, work your magic.
So then your intercession would begin on the 26th of March. So that Friday.
Great.
Okay.
Because to be honest with you, I think the calendar itself is going to be a win-win for our families once they kind of just get used to the fact that we're not starting as early as we normally do. We're ending very similar to what we did this year, but I think that spring break part would be the biggest concern for them to look at this as is written. But I think if we make that change, I think our families will really embrace this calendar.
Okay.
And our staff members as well.
Okay. So, Ms. Cherry Smith, if you'll make that notation.
Dr. Smith, can I ask another question, please?
Yes, ma'am.
The restart and the year-round days, are they the same length? The same number of instructional hours? I'm just trying to think about the hours requirement, or do they have a different length of the day?
Their days are either the same length or longer. So, I know our Snipes specifically has a longer day.
Yeah, it's our students. They start going to class at 7:25. The tardy bell is at 7:45, and we've always dismissed at 2:30, but we're hoping we can dismiss at 2:35 this year, adding that additional 5 minutes to the end.
So any additional discussion in regards to year-round? So then we have Isaac Bear. And of course, this calendar is specific to their school. And it was developed by the Isaac Bear administration and staff. And I don't know if Mr. Valance, oh, I do see him. Mr. Valance, do you have any comments that you'd like to share in regards to the calendar?
No, ma'am. I think the calendar fits our purpose. I was working along with the other non-traditional schools, just trying to match up those remote work days. And we had decided that we would like to use it on the third Friday of each month, starting in September. And the only one I changed was February because we had a teacher work day on that 19th date. So I switched it back to the fourth Friday. But I think it's nice, and I think my staff and my families will like it.
All right, thank you. And different this year than in the years past, Wilmington Early College and C-Tech will actually have the same calendar. And this calendar was developed by the administration and staff of both those schools. And I don't know if we've got any of those administrators on the call.
Yes, this is Ms. Wooten representing both C-Tech and WEX. And we worked in tandem to create this, and we're both in agreement.
And we're very appreciative of this. One less calendar. Okay, we are a work in progress with Lake Forest Academy, but I think we're very close. And probably will have a draft calendar by the end of the day. So, question from me to the group, what have we missed?
Dr. Smith, can I ask a question about the election day in November?
Yes.
If we're, I don't know how, if we're sort of looking for hours and things like that, would there be any reason or any way that we would, it's already a work day, would there be any thought to making it a remote learning day for students? Because otherwise it's just a day off, I think, for them, correct?
So it is a teacher work day. Are you making that suggestion so that we would have 6 remote learning days as a part of the calendar?
Yeah, I just didn't know. I mean, if we, if we needed, because otherwise students don't really have any days off in their, during the year. This would, sort of keep continuity up for a week, during a week, and also give them kind of one remote learning day in the first semester before the second semester. Plus it would get us 6 more hours. I just didn't know if that was a thought we might have.
So my understanding is what we don't have the flexibility of adding those additional remote learning days unless we find ourselves in essentially an identified state of emergency. I don't believe that we have the ability to do that.
Gotcha.
So, we could definitely make it a student day.
No, I mean, I think we need to keep it, for our polling places and everything like that closed for, face to face. I just didn't know if that was an option. Doesn't sound like it is.
Okay.
Dr. Smith, I do have one concern regarding the election.
I'm sorry, you're fading out just a little bit.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I do have one concern regarding the election. You're going to be looking at a situation in the fall where you have thousands of people pouring into our buildings. And I know we want that flexibility from the extra minutes, but I'm wondering if it might not be a good idea to use one of those days to deep clean our buildings the day after the election, because you're going to be in there's going to be a lot of people coming in. I just wanted to throw that out there. I know we want that week to be as normal as possible, but I just have concerns about all the people in the building and then not being able to sanitize.
Okay, so and you faded just a little bit. So in essence, you'd like to see 2 teacher work days instead of just 1?
I think something to consider. I really want those buildings sanitized. If we can do it in a day, great. Polls close at 7 though, and our students are going to be in the building 12 hours later. So I just have concerns about our ability to sanitize the building after that many people visit.
Yeah, well, and I definitely appreciate that. And I don't want to overspeak. I don't know if Mr. Anderson is on the call, because he surely could speak to this so much better than I can. And what I would offer you, and this is slightly my opinion of what I'll say is my understanding. It's not that folks are throughout our building. When they're there to cast their vote, it is in a limited space. And I do know that we as a school system are looking at equipment that will allow for ease of sanitation, so that we would be able to sanitize large areas very quickly with a greater level of frequency. And so again, Mr. Anderson's not on the call to describe the equipment that we're looking at and the processes that we're looking at in place. But what I would also offer is, if we adopt the calendars as they are, and we find ourselves in a situation where we need to make changes for the very reason you've identified, then we could do that after the fact fairly easily. I don't know if I've got enough information now to kind of drive that decision. But when I do get off the call, I will reach out to Mr. Anderson to see if he's has any concerns about our ability to ensure that these buildings are safe for when our children return the next day. And if he does, then I surely don't mind us reconvening, having that conversation, or making those changes to reflect that in all of our calendars. But I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. I think where we are right now is just so very new and novel to all of us that we really do have to think outside the box and think about things that would not have been, you know, on our minds or part of our conversation when we're talking about calendars any year prior to this one. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Any additional questions, discussions? What did we miss?
Dr. Smith, there's one matter the board may wish to consider. Many districts authorize the superintendent to make adjustments to the calendar based on inclement weather and/or acts of God. The language from the student accounting manual that allows the superintendent to close an individual school during the day or to delay opening or to close early. Mr. Bowyer, I don't know if that's something you'd like to contemplate. I think the time to discuss that would be at the time the calendars are presented. One of the benefits of doing that is that you can make the adjustment and communicate with faculty and staff as to what they should do on a day when they can't report due to inclement weather, and also communicate to the public what the next step would be if there's anything to follow. So I would put that on the table just as something you might want to consider.
Well, and Dr. Burns, thank you for that. And I will actually share with you that we have actually had situations where we have operated, I don't want to say it was me, but outside of the board's authority, just a little bit in making calendar changes, just simply because of the timing of the next board meeting. So the superintendent having the flexibility that you just described, I think would serve the district really well, because we operate with so many different calendars. It may be that for one particular calendar, you know, the opportunity to make an adjustment occurs, you know, that following week, and it's not going to be present again until that next semester, and the semester ends in 4 weeks. And, you know, our board meeting happens after that. I very much support that suggestion. And Mr. DeBoyer, if you need specific examples of that, I could work on that and make sure that you have those, you know, for any discussion that we might have in regards to this at the board meeting.
Yes, please provide those. I'd be happy to make that recommendation. I think that would be in keeping with the best interests of the school system and with the board. I think I'm more than happy to pass that responsibility on to really where it belongs, which is to the superintendent and the administration. So I would be happy to make that recommendation. Thank you very much, Dr. Burns.
All right. I know we've got a representative from public health on the call. I don't know if Ms. Turner, you might have some comments, or just
Good. Hey, I am here. Yes, ma'am. No, it's fascinating what y'all have put together. It is amazing. So hats off to everybody who was involved in this. And I don't know if this is the group to ask, but is there any thoughts as to what it's going to look like as far as numbers of children in classrooms and all that when school does start back? Are you waiting for guidance from DPI on that? Where does that stand?
And Dr. Burns, if I could defer to you, because I think you're, you know, more part of the primary conversation. I think it comes to me just a little more secondary.
Certainly. DHHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, has been working to develop guidelines and requirements for public schools for reopening. My understanding is that the work by DHHS has been done and has been passed to the Department of Public Instruction. They're now working to operationalize the requirements of DHHS. We were told several weeks ago that that guidance and the requirements would likely be very similar to those requirements for child care centers and summer day camps that's already been issued. Next week, we may receive that information. At this point, I have no further information other than that. I've looked at plans from other states. Some of them are leveled based on the conditions at the time, whether the virus is being spread minimally, moderately, or majorly. And there are components that go along with that. What I would expect is if we receive the guidance in the next week, it will take us a week or two, maybe longer, to analyze and determine what that means for New Hanover County Schools to put in place our next steps. We're prepared to do that. Senior leaders have done a great job to this point of taking the information and making it work in this district. So the answer is we have to wait and see. And once we get the information, we'll certainly provide it. And then the next step will be, what does it mean for New Hanover County Schools? And we'll work through that and be sure that that's distributed and put the plan necessary in place to go forward. The interesting thing about that is it's likely that it could change based on the conditions. And I do think that's being taken into account as DHHS requirements and guidance is operationalized by DPI.
Got it. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I would like to say, Mr. Bully, thank you very much for talking about planning. And Dr. Smith, I will tell you that I know that our property management folks have, I'm sure I'm not going to say it right, but some type of misting machines that help disinfect large areas in a lesser amount of time. So I don't know if those are county pieces of equipment, and if Board of Elections is who is using your facilities, if there can be an agreement there. If you don't have that, just something to think about if you want to reach out to Sarah Wilmoth at the county, our property management department for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. I don't want to not hear any voices that have comments or questions to ask as a part of this process. So I definitely wanted to make sure that we provide that opportunity. So any additional questions, comments, concerns, suggestions? If not, I really truly want to thank everyone for the investment that they've made in this process. If you've been on this calendar journey with me before, you know, typically we're a 1-2 meeting kind of show, and then we present our 9 draft calendars to the board. This has been very, very different, and I'll have to say very honestly, I have very much enjoyed this process. I think we've engaged more of our families as a part of this discussion, more of our administrators, and hopefully more of our teachers in this conversation. And I think as we continue to develop calendars for the district, we need to make it a priority that we work really, really hard to make sure that we capture that voice. And maybe the next part of this is we'll engage our students in this conversation directly as well. Although I do believe their needs have been reflected in the calendars that we're putting in front of the board. So we will clean all of this up. We'll make the changes to year round. We will finalize our Lake Forest Academy calendar and send all of those drafts out to members of our calendar committee. And then our plan will be to make a presentation to the board at their interim meeting on June 16th, unless that date changes. And I'd like to close by kind of turning it over to our chairperson for the committee, Mr. Boyer.
Thank you, Dr. Smith, and thank you everybody for your work. The beginning of this meeting, I couldn't speak. I think that speaks volumes about where we are and what we've had to do. I want to congratulate everybody. This is our first post-pandemic calendar, and I don't know if it's going to hold based on the situations that evolve, but we've added some flexibility, and I'm very proud of what we've done. It was a big effort, a big undertaking in a very short amount of time, and I just want to thank everybody again. Thank you, all stakeholders, and thanks to our administrative leadership. I'm just proud to work for this team, and thank you guys very much. Please have a wonderful and safe weekend. And we will see you all at the board meeting on June 16th, where I look forward to offering these recommendations to our Board of Education. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so very much.